One of the biggest misconceptions people have about attraction is that they believe a woman only reacts when a man explicitly says, "I'm no longer interested." In reality, that conversation rarely needs to happen. Human beings are highly sensitive to changes in behavior, energy, and emotional investment. Long before words are spoken, people notice patterns shifting, and when a woman realizes that your attention is no longer directed toward her in the same way, she feels the difference. What makes this particularly powerful is that the change is often subtle. You're no longer the first one to initiate every conversation. You're no longer looking for reasons to impress her. You're no longer structuring your day around her availability. The constant emotional pursuit begins to disappear. At first, she may not consciously identify what's happening, but she feels that something has changed. Psychologically, people become accustomed to consistency. When someone has been present, attentive, and emotionally available for a long period of time, that presence becomes part of their expectations. It becomes familiar, and familiarity has an interesting effect on the human mind. We often stop fully appreciating what is constantly available, not because we are ungrateful, but because certainty reduces attention. The moment certainty disappears, attention returns. This is why a woman frequently notices your emotional withdrawal before she fully understands its meaning. She starts sensing that your focus is elsewhere. The energy she once received effortlessly is no longer being offered in the same way. And that absence creates questions. She may begin wondering why you seem calmer, why you're less reactive, why you're no longer seeking reassurance or validation, why conversations feel different, why you seem comfortable whether she responds or not. These questions matter because uncertainty activates curiosity. Human beings are naturally drawn to solving emotional mysteries. When someone who was once predictable becomes less emotionally dependent, people instinctively try to understand what changed. Not because they suddenly fell deeply in love, but because the human mind dislikes unexplained shifts in familiar patterns. This is where many men make a critical mistake. They believe that creating a reaction requires playing games. They think they need to ignore messages intentionally, provoke jealousy, or manufacture distance. But genuine change is far more powerful than manipulation. A woman can often sense the difference between a man who is pretending not to care and a man who has genuinely redirected his energy toward his own life. The first feels forced, the second feels authentic. Authenticity carries weight because it reflects inner transformation rather than strategy. When a man genuinely stops chasing validation, something changes in the way he carries himself. His decisions become less influenced by fear of rejection. His mood becomes less dependent on another person's attention. He starts investing in his purpose, his goals, his growth, and his peace of mind. Ironically, that is often the moment he becomes more attractive, not because he is trying harder, but because he is trying less. There is a philosophical lesson hidden within this dynamic. People often believe that attachment creates value. They assume that the more tightly they hold onto something, the more important it becomes. Yet many of life's most valuable qualities emerge when we stop grasping for control. Confidence appears when we stop seeking approval. Peace appears when we stop forcing outcomes. Attraction often increases when we stop making it our primary objective. When a woman sees that your emotional world no longer revolves around her, she is confronted with a new version of you, a version that exists independently of her reactions. And independence has a profound psychological effect because it signals strength without needing to announce it. She notices the difference long before she admits it. She feels the shift before she can explain it. And that realization begins the process of reevaluating everything she thought she knew about your place in her life. Because in the end, people rarely recognize your value when you're constantly proving it. They recognize it when your absence reveals what your presence truly meant. Once a woman notices that something has changed in your behavior, something even more significant begins to happen beneath the surface. She starts reevaluating your value. Not the value you tried to convince her of, not the value you explained through words, but the value that becomes visible when your attention is no longer freely available. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human psychology. People often assume that value is created through constant demonstration. They believe the more they give, the more they prove, and the more they sacrifice, the more appreciated they will become. Yet appreciation rarely works that way. In many cases, what is constantly available becomes psychologically invisible. This does not mean people are selfish. It means the human mind adapts. We adapt to comfort. We adapt to attention. We adapt to consistency. Eventually, what once felt special begins to feel normal. When you were always there, your presence may have become part of her expectations. Your messages, your support, your emotional availability, and your willingness to invest may have seemed like permanent features of the relationship dynamic. Not because she consciously decided to undervalue them, but because certainty often reduces awareness. Then something changes. You stop centering your life around her reactions. You stop measuring your worth through her approval. You stop treating her attention as the most important thing in your world. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts. And whenever a dynamic shifts, perception shifts with it. She begins looking at the relationship through a different lens. Conversations that once seemed ordinary take on new meaning. Moments that were overlooked suddenly become more significant. She may find herself remembering details she had forgotten, replaying interactions, revisiting memories, and questioning assumptions she once held with confidence. Why does this happen? Because human beings often understand value most clearly through contrast. We notice health after illness. We appreciate freedom after restriction. We recognize peace after chaos, and we often understand someone's importance after their emotional investment is no longer guaranteed. This is not about punishment. It is not about making someone suffer. It is about the reality that absence creates perspective. When your attention was consistently available, there was little reason to examine its significance. But when that attention begins to disappear, the mind naturally asks questions. What changed? Why did he stop pursuing? What was I overlooking? Did I underestimate him? Those questions can be uncomfortable because they force self-reflection. Many people prefer certainty because certainty protects them from having to examine difficult truths. But uncertainty creates awareness. It forces a person to confront what they may have taken for granted and what role another person genuinely played in their life. This is why chasing rarely increases your perceived value. Excessive pursuit communicates that you are trying to convince someone of your worth. Genuine value, however, does not need constant explanation. It becomes evident through its impact. Think about the people you respect most in life. They are rarely the individuals constantly demanding recognition. More often, they are the people whose presence carries substance. The people whose absence leaves a noticeable space. The same principle applies in relationships. When a woman sees that you are no longer seeking her validation, she gains an opportunity to evaluate you without the distortion of pursuit. She sees who you are when you are not trying to impress her. She sees your character rather than your effort. your self-respect rather than your need for approval, and that distinction matters, because attraction is rarely sustained by effort alone. It is sustained by perception. It is sustained by how someone views your identity, your standards, your confidence, and your relationship with yourself. When you stop over-investing in someone who is uncertain about you, you communicate a powerful message without speaking a single word. You communicate that your value does not depend on being chosen. You communicate that your life remains meaningful regardless of who stays and who leaves. That realization often causes people to see you differently, not because you became someone new overnight, but because they are finally seeing what was there all along. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson. The goal is never to make someone regret losing you. The goal is to become so grounded in your own worth that you no longer need to convince anyone of it. Because true value is not recognized when it is constantly advertised, it is recognized when its absence makes people understand what they failed to see. After a woman notices the change in your behavior and begins reevaluating your value, there is one final stage that often creates the strongest emotional reaction of all. It is not when you ignore her. It is not when you try to make her jealous. It is not when you post carefully crafted images to prove how well you're doing. The most powerful moment comes when she realizes that you have genuinely moved forward. And there is a profound difference between pretending to move on and actually moving on. Many people perform detachment while secretly hoping for a reaction. They stop calling, stop texting, and create distance, but emotionally they remain attached to the outcome. Their happiness still depends on whether the other person notices. Their confidence still depends on whether they receive validation. Their peace still depends on whether someone comes back. That is not freedom, that is attachment wearing a different disguise. True emotional independence is something entirely different. It is the point where your focus returns to your own life. Your energy is no longer invested in controlling another person's feelings. You stop trying to predict their actions. You stop wondering whether they miss you. You stop measuring your worth through their attention. Instead, you become occupied with building yourself. You become invested in your purpose, your ambitions, your health, your discipline, your relationships, and your future. And people notice that, not because you announce it, but because genuine transformation always changes the way a person carries themselves. There is a calmness that emerges when someone no longer feels the need to chase. There is a confidence that develops when someone stops seeking approval. There is a strength that becomes visible when a person realizes they can be happy regardless of who chooses to stay or leave. This is where many people misunderstand attraction. They think attraction is created through persuasion. They believe that if they say the right words, show enough effort, or prove enough loyalty, they can make someone value them. But attraction is often influenced by something much deeper. People are naturally drawn to emotional stability. They are drawn to individuals who possess direction, self-respect, and inner certainty, not because those qualities are flashy, but because they communicate security. They suggest that this person has a life beyond external validation. When a woman realizes that your emotional world no longer revolves around her, she is confronted with a version of you that operates independently of her influence. That realization can be surprisingly powerful. For some women, it creates admiration. They see a level of maturity they may not have fully appreciated before. For others, it creates curiosity. They begin wondering what changed and how you became so grounded. For some, it may even create regret, not because you manipulated them into feeling regret, but because they now recognize qualities they overlooked when your attention was always available. But regardless of her reaction, the most important transformation has already occurred. The transformation happened within you. Because the purpose of growth is never to trigger a response from someone else. The purpose of growth is to free yourself from needing that response. Philosophically, this is one of the greatest lessons relationships can teach us. Many people spend years trying to control outcomes. They try to control who loves them, who stays, who leaves, who understands them, and who appreciates them. Yet, the more tightly we attempt to control these things, the more power we give away. Real power comes from accepting what is beyond your control and mastering what is within it. You cannot force someone to value you. You cannot force someone to choose you. You cannot force someone to see your worth. But you can choose how you respond. You can choose your standards. You can choose your mindset. You can choose the quality of the life you build moving forward. And that is why emotional independence is so attractive. It reflects a person who has stopped negotiating with reality and started working with it. A person who no longer needs constant reassurance because they have developed trust in themselves. When a woman realizes you're no longer interested, she may react with curiosity, admiration, reflection, or even regret. But none of those reactions are the true victory. The true victory is that you have reached a point where your peace no longer depends on any of them. Because the moment you stop chasing validation is the moment you begin creating a life that validates itself.